what's up guys? Hey, as I was stitching up this video last night, I realized there were a couple areas that I didn't really go into. So what I did instead was I found a video by Keith Tanner with Flying Miata. He's just legendary. He puts out such awesome videos. You should subscribe to his channel if you can. And he talks about all the pros and cons about having ITBs and compromises. Kind of goes into a lot more of the basic detail that I did. I sort of went through the challenges, but I just dove right into it. So if you want a little bit more of a high level, more kind of foundationary background on ITBs, be sure to check out that link. Good timing, he just posted it yesterday, so that was good. I also linked another video kind of from this other vlogger who got rid of his ITBs after a year because he just couldn't take it, I guess, for daily driving, because he was experiencing a lot of the issues that Keith talks about, and a lot of the issues that I spent, you know, Adnan and I spent almost a year trying to combat, and eventually I'm very confident that I solved them, at least to my satisfaction. So here's the video, enjoy. Hey, we're here to talk about something pretty fun and exciting, and I figured I went for a drive this morning. I busted out the GoPro and wanted to share with you guys some of this awesome view, and really awesome roads too. So even in a pickup truck, I'm sure he's enjoying himself. But yeah, check that out. If you're ever out my way on the West Coast, I'm happy to take you out on these roads. They're everywhere here. So yeah, there's the waters over there, and just a stone throw away you get these amazing hills. Anyway, we're going to talk about something pretty exciting that I think a few of you guys might be interested in hearing about. I got rid of my Comtech supercharger. Everything was working out perfect with that, but you know, I just wanted to change, so decided to go with ITBs, Individual Throttle Bodies. And I posted on the socials about what some of the folks wanted to know more about in terms of ITBs on an NSX in general, kind of challenges and pros and cons with this kit, just a whole bunch of things that's ITB related, and probably specifically to an NSX. So I will just start going through them without in no particular order, and I gathered the Q&As and I put them on a list, but I'm sorry, I actually forgot to write down who asked these specific questions. But in general, a few of them were pretty repetitive anyway. All right, I'll try to not make this video go so long like my normal videos, but it'll go as long as it's gonna go. All right, so basically this is the kit, and it's basically an ASM kit, but not the ASM from Japan that everyone normally thinks about. AS Motorsports is the producer of this kit from the Netherlands. Adnan, really super cool guy, very like such an enthusiast. He really values like the R&D and the little bits of work, even though it's a pain in the ass sometimes, but he's been so patient with me and sort of my request for wanting to get really the most out of this kit. So I'll go over why I sort of went with this and not the supercharger, but I'll try to keep this short. Anyway, looking at the roads that I have here, they are really tight, swoopy, flowy, and so I really wanted to prioritize smoothness in throttle, throttle response. Just basically it has to be daily driver friendly. These are some of my criterias before going into this kit, and I spent about probably 2 years researching and just understanding the challenges with ITBs, understanding the compromises that race cars have to make to get top end performance, but also cars like, you know, the E46 M3 or the E39 M5. All those cars come stock with ITBs also, but what are the kind of compromises that they had to make it OEM kind of friendly? So some of the must must-haves that I need to have was it needed to have really good idle performance, needed to have good cold start performance. It can't, you know, like fall flat on its face when you like tap on the throttle per se, right? So even sometimes poorly tuned OEM setups, over time they start to get really rough, they idle rough, throttle breaks up, you know, it starts to become more on and off type of feeling. I didn't want any of that stuff. I wanted to make sure that it was super smooth. I wanted to make sure that, you know, in these canyon roads, as I'm like in mid turn and giving it, you know, 60% of gas, that in between that VTEC crossover point, it wouldn't be abrupt. Like those are some of the things that's super important to me. Even if that meant I lose, you know, 5-10 horsepower at the top, getting all that mid-range performance and the smoothness and that insane throttle response. This thing, the throttle response is like just so crisp. It's really nice. So anyway, let's just start and go through some of the questions. So the first question was ASM. Who is ASM? I'd mentioned it's AS Motorsports with Adnan. And again, guys, phenomenal human being. He's really such a cool guy. I'm glad we're friends and we kind of went through this journey together. And I'll go through some of the details about the kit and why we decided to do an off-the-shelf, like ground up R&D sort of exercise that actually took longer than I expected. Another question was, why didn't I just go with an off-the-shelf solution? So there are quite a few kits out there, as you guys might know. Hayward makes a kit. Let's see, SOS makes a kit that's basically sort of loosely based off the Hayward solution. And Toda, obviously, right? Toda makes a kit. There are a few other one-off, like Japanese kind of one-off kits too that are a little bit harder to source, but generally the most popular ones are the Toda unit, the SOS, which I'm not sure if they still make them. They probably do if you ask Chris. He's a great guy. Let's see, and another one from Lance Hayward, and I think Mita or Mark Perez or whatever his company name is now is kind of selling those. But anyway, just I had a really bad like procurement experience with him, but I'm just gonna leave it at that. So I actually ended up buying that kit first, but for various reasons, and you know, mostly on the procurement side, I decided I just wanted to do like a ground up setup. Okay, sorry about the cars. I'm not sure how loudly these are coming off in the microphone, so I apologize about that. Let's see. So yeah, that's basically why we decided to go with a kind of ground up setup. So the next question, what is the fueling setup I have on here? Great question. So fueling, let's start over here. Check out that view. In terms of fueling, we're going with basically the OEM stuff. So it was important for us to have the injector placements, and I'll just go into that. It's one of the key differences with this kit is where the injectors are placed. Okay, so where the injectors are placed allows us to use the OEM fuel rails. So front and back uses OEM fuel rails. You can even use your OEM motorcycle. It is kind of loud, sorry about that. You can use the OEM fuel pressure regulator. I'm using the OEM fuel filter, but I'm using a Supra Denso fuel pump from when I was force inducted, and I just kept that in. I didn't want to mess with that. It's fine. So yeah, one of the cool things about this is you can use your OEM setup. You can even use your OEM injectors, but I don't suggest that. I'm currently using Injector Dynamics ID 1000 injectors, and by the way, this is a 100% stock engine. So I have the ITB setup. Adnan and I developed this for this motor, but you'll probably get a kind of appreciable gain with a built motor. But I wanted to build something off of a known like stock block. So I wasn't, if I had issues, I wasn't chasing them down. Like, you know, for example, if you have a built block, you could possibly have like, you know, really aggressive cams with no vacuum, or you could have adjustable cam gears. So you'll be chasing all sorts of different things, and I didn't want to do that when we were developing this ITB. So now that this ITB runs perfect on a stock motor, I now have the confidence to put this on a built motor, which will come later. And that built motor will basically, hopefully, I'm not sure where I'm going to go with that, but probably some cams, probably adjustable cam gears, definitely high compression. I'm unsure yet on what displacement, maybe 3.5, maybe 3.8, maybe just 3.2, just more of a, you know, kind of a stock high revving engine too. There's also some pros and cons with all of that side of things. So, oh, let's finish the fueling question. My gosh, I am jumping all over the place. So in my pocket, I actually brought an injector to help illustrate a couple things. One of the key differences with this, and I will sort of get you a better view. So you guys can see this is the head right here, and this is the intake manifold. So this intake manifold is one of the most special things about this setup, because this is a 5-axis billet CNC manifold, 100% aluminum. And the reason why is because if you look at the other ones out there, none of them have the injector placement where the OEM injector is. So you can see here that the OEM injector placement is right, or the injector is placed in the OEM location, which basically as you spray the fuel into the chamber, it hits directly in the back of the intake valve. So you get really good, like with that setup, you get really good idle performance, you get really good cold start, you get really good like low velocity air. So anything that isn't like wide open throttle, you'll get really pretty stock like performance out of an injector placement that's over here. So if you look at, like, say maybe the Hayward kit or the SOS kit, they use injector placement that is built into like the cast housing of the Gen V throttle bodies. These are Gen V throttle bodies, by the way, which you could, if you go with ASM's kit, you can spec it for like the AT Power ones, which are really nice throttle bodies. But I wanted to go with the Gen Vs to not only keep the cost low, but I wanted to see like how far you could really go with sort of the standard Gen V setup, which are, you know, some of the more popular ones out there. So going back to injector placement, the other kits out there, even Toda, so Toda, SOS, Hayward, etc., all the other ones I've seen that are available right now, they put the injector placement right there. So where this injector is, if it's, let's say it's like right there, right? It tends to, at low velocity, so during like startup or any time where there's low, the speed of the air coming through the runner is slow, then this ends up just spraying to the back of the throttle body, and it ends up, you know, dripping into the cylinder, and you get like poor cold start performance and poor startup performance, and it just kind of becomes an issue. So for race cars, like the Toto kit was made for, really, then most of that doesn't really matter, because you'll be at wide open throttle like most of the time, right? So that was something that I did not want, and I just didn't want to deal with that compromise. So the really cool thing is this, you might be thinking, well, okay, then you're not going to get any top end power. Well, it really is, I may be missing out on like 5 or 10 horsepower at the top, but if I really wanted to go with a super like, you know, no holds barred, all in high performance solution, then Gen V does sell cast runners, or I should say bell mounts, that have built-in injector placements. Like they kind of go like this, or sometimes if they were straight up, they go on this side too. So those could be like secondaries, where like, let's say you could set up your EMS to spray the secondaries at like the VTEC cutover point. So then you could start to bleed those off, the main injectors, the primaries, and you can start to bleed in the secondary injectors for high RPM performance. So you can easily do that with this kit as long as your ECU can handle like a double injector setup. So that's super sweet. Like that's an option for, you know, all in, like if you want to run a dual injector setup. So let's see here. Try not to talk too much. I can go on and on and on about this. Another question is, what EMS setup am I using? I'm using the HKS setup, which my car is off, so you won't be able to see. But I'm using a HKS EMS, which is actually been surprisingly really good. And it still does the job very well for me. And so I haven't really wanted to go with like, say, a Haltech or a Link or even the Infinity. You know, so far it's been totally fine, and I get the drivability that I need from it. So to answer that question, I'm using the HKS. Another question is, what's the effect on motor longevity? I think that question stemmed from these open stacks. So I'm not sure if I mentioned, but one of the criteria that I really want is I will have an airbox for this. So this is kind of in development, you know, under construction, work in progress setup where I have these open stacks, and these are 3D printed. I put these on my 3D printer with a good friend. He helped me design these, but ultimately we will have a closed airbox here with the OEM panel filter on this side, getting cold air intake from this side. And guys, don't mind the mess. I have a lot of wires that are zip tied and untucked and just kind of everywhere. Like, look at that. How sad is that? The igniter I have over here. But I don't want to start tying things up and start wrapping things in a tidy way until I get that airbox in, because then I'll know exactly where everything needs to go. So that's a work in progress. But what was the question? The question was on longevity. So yeah, if you're going to run open stacks, it's kind of a no-brainer. You are going to get more debris into the motor. And I'm not so much worried about the really large pebbles and things, because it's, you know, the pebble would have to bounce around in here and somehow end up in there, which can certainly happen. But, you know, I'm not super concerned about that at the moment. What I am concerned about is I have taken this kit apart a couple times in the last 3,000 miles, and there is like a black filmy residue that is just inside here everywhere. So it's not excessive, but you do kind of see it. I don't know if you can see it now, but maybe not. I'm not sure. Maybe. But it does exist in there, and you know, it's worrisome in the long term. And the short term, or if you constantly clean this, like say every 20,000 miles, not a big deal. I'm not really worried about it, but I will have an airbox in here pretty soon. By the way, a good friend of mine, he's amazing. I don't want to mention him because of his work, but he's helping me build an airbox for this, and it's gonna hopefully look OEM. And oh, so yeah, the airbox. The plan is basically to have this look sort of OEM. Like, I don't want any of this exposed area. I'm gonna build, or you know, hopefully we can design something that incorporates a full lid, but maybe like, you know, the shaker hood style or something, where you can still see a hint of ITBs in there, but it'll look fairly OEM, kind of like maybe Type R inspired, or you know, GT3 inspired, where it's just a little bit more than OEM. So that's sort of the look that we're going for. It's nice to be in that position now where I'm sort of worried about like looks and really like aesthetic stuff, because it took a really long time to put this thing together the way we wanted it. So for example, this throttle linkage setup, we went through maybe 5 different setups, because everything matters. Like the progressivity of this main throttle bell crank, the linkages, the push rods in here, and how smooth those were. These are like German branded push rods, and that center bell crank in there, that had to be measured and it had to be calculated based on the sweep on here and what it relates to the sweep on that center bell crank. This bracket, I went through a few versions of this. Like, it was just so much little itty bitty like changes, because you know, you change this, you change that, it affects everything downstream. And for example, as you're designing kits like these from the get-go, you don't realize that, you know, maybe like you're fully depressed there on the throttle pedal inside the car, but it's only like 80% open over here on the throttle. So things like that was really accounted for. But most importantly, the one thing that I really wanted to make sure with these throttles, and this is where Adnan's patience was just clutch. You know, as you press on the throttle, I didn't want any of that like on and off feeling. I want it to be very progressive, but just on the borderline of controllable. So like if you're parallel parking, right? Like nobody wants a throttle pedal just like on and off, on and off, on and off. You want something that's smooth and gradual and controllable. But at the track, when you're at the upper end of the RPM, you want something that's quick, and you want the throttle response to be like crisp. So all of those scenarios really made it kind of a tedious process, but all worth it in the end. Another question was drive-by-wire. So if I had a drive-by-wire setup on here, I actually would have not needed to go through all those like throttle linkage kind of brain damage. But because I don't have drive-by-wire on here, then that's why you needed to do that. But for the folks who have drive-by-wire, I think Adnan's going to work on a drive-by-wire kit. It's actually fairly easy to set up a housing unit where you can put the drive-by-wire setup over here, or even one on each end. It's just costly. Drive-by-wire units are not cheap. Probably at least, you know, $1,000 just for the throttle body unit. So hopefully that's coming. I don't have any time or energy to help put that together for him, but maybe at some point I will if I get super bored, but not anytime soon. So for you guys who are looking for the drive-by-wire setup, contact Adnan, and maybe he can help you with that. Everything else, all the hard part is done. Like, you know, the hardware and everything, it's all done. So really the drive-by-wire is just to locate a build a housing for it here and connect the drive-by-wire on each side, or maybe just one. So part of that is testing. What are some of the other questions? Will I go with motor work? Do I have plans for cams? Do I have plans for just engine work? I think I went into that a little bit. Yes, I think so. The reason why I say I think so is because David at HQ Engineering down here in LA, who's going to help me with the motor build, he's been pretty busy, and I haven't really bugged him, but we still need to nail down a few things on what I want to get out of the engine. But for the most part, I'll be perfectly honest, like this setup for my, you know, for my roads up here has been fantastic. Like this is just, I don't know, if I was to guess, actually on my to-do list is a dyno session to max out the power from this. But right now I'm under conservative timing. I'm just kind of street tuning it, which by the way, I have about maybe 50 hours of tuning time behind the computer with this car. And it is like crisp, and it's really smooth, and the power delivery is nice. The power itself and the torque feels good. It feels just a little bit above stock, just a kick above stock, maybe 20 horsepower above stock to the wheels, something like that. And honestly, like that's great. Like it feels really good at that, because my car, you know, it's pretty lightweight. I think this is about 2,650 pounds, because it was 27 and 30 when I had the blower on here. So removing that blower probably saved me, I wish I would have measured it, but removing that blower probably saved me, oh gosh, I mean conservatively 40 to 60 pounds, honestly, because this setup here is actually lighter than the OEM manifold and the throttle body and all of those things. So you might net have a savings of like 10 pounds. going with this. And that's just with me lifting it in the garage. And you know, I'm stupid because I never measured everything, but I probably could. The next time I remove all this, I'll start measuring weights. But there is a noticeable significant savings in weight with this. And then, you know, the supercharger was up top too, so you're at the upper end of the motor, so getting that weight savings pushes the center of gravity lower in the car. So it's just like win-win-win situation if you don't really want like a lot of power. Okay, let's see, we talked about the motor build, talked about some weight savings. Someone asked, did I mess around with the VTEC point? The VTEC cutover point, that's really up to you. VTEC cutover is, in this car with stock cams, you don't really gain that much power by, you know, engaging VTEC at a lower RPM, in my opinion, from what I've seen on the dyno. For me, it's really more about engagement point and when it comes on as smooth as I want it to be. So it's more about drivability at that point, VTEC engagement point in my case. So I think I have it just slightly lower than stock, like around 5,000 RPM, maybe even 4,900 RPM is the engagement point when I roll in the VTEC lobes. But yeah, it's really up to you. Talk to your tuner, figure out what kind of driving you like to do. If you're like, you know, a stoplight to stoplight kind of guy, then you may want to roll in VTEC a little bit earlier. If you have like a really tight course and your gearing is set up a specific way to be like on the short end, then maybe you want to have VTEC roll in a little bit higher in the RPM. I don't know, it's really up to you. So VTEC point for me is a very like personal decision with this car. Now, when we go with a built motor with cams and cam gears and you know, high compression and all those things, it's going to be a totally different ball of wax. VTEC is going to be determined again through a set of exercises, the dyno runs, track drivability like in these hills. So it's going to really depend. Okay, so let's just move on from the VTEC point. What's the cost of this? The cost of this, you'll have to figure that out with Adnan. He's gonna probably put some numbers together at some point, but it should be very competitive because again, you're using a lot of factory parts like the fuel rails and everything. But these billet manifolds are not cheap. Those are 5-axis billet and they're not cheap. They're very precise, they're not cheap. One thing that I noticed about the set I got from Mita was the runners didn't even really line up very well with the ports on the heads. So they were off by like, you know, 1/8 of an inch. They were kind of scooted too far inward. So those port matching things, like those things are things that you may not notice when you give it to an installer, but if you're installing it yourself, you definitely notice those little things. And so that type of preciseness is why, you know, I really wanted to go with my own setup. Let's see, are there any issues with idle, with vacuum and air conditioning? Good question. So on this car, you can see down here, I actually have this is a brake booster vacuum pump made by Hella. These come stock in some cars like the Volvos and everything, and I actually installed it here, but I don't have it plugged in because I didn't need it. So with this setup, you can see I have the brake booster vacuum line connected directly to the vacuum distribution block, which are connected to each runner. So that produces enough vacuum to run that brake booster at the track like forever. So basically I was really stoked about that. The reason why I still have it here is because if I go with really aggressive cams on the new motor, I may need that because ITBs are just not known for producing very good vacuum. So right now I can produce maybe like a decent, I don't know, 20 inches of vacuum, maybe on average like 15 inches of vacuum, which is really good actually for this kind of setup. So that's enough for me to build some compensation tables in the ECU to really, like, you know, maximize efficiency when I'm off wide open throttle. So I'm still running the factory map sensor, which is in here, and I'm running compensation tables in the ECU to help it really ride and drive smoothly. So air conditioning also, like, I know some of the, like, if you don't tune, say like an SOS unit very well, then as you turn on the air conditioning, the RPM starts to go down, and then your engine starts to bog, and maybe your car will die. That will definitely happen, even like during cold weather especially. So although why would you have your air conditioning on in cold weather? But anyway, if any kind of load on the engine at idle will need compensation in your ECU. So I think that's really more of an ECU issue than it is with ITBs. However, having the injectors running this way up high, and just idle performance in general. So again, when your injector is up this high and your air velocity at idle is so slow, that injector is just going to be spraying towards the back of this wall, and the fuel is just going to be dripping into, you know, kind of dripping uncontrollably, unmetered into the intake manifold, or yeah, into the intake manifold and into the heads. So you have that to consider. So all of these things, they all work together, right? They all work together. So that's an important key point for that. Dyno numbers. That's last on my list. So I already spent about 5 hours on the dyno just to get the drivability up to spec, just so that I could start tuning it on the street and fine tuning it on the streets. So I did spend quite a lot of dyno time that day, but you know, just a little bit of a cop out here, because this might sound like a cop out, but we did run out of time that day. I spent planned for 2 hours or 2 to 3 hours in dyno, spent 5, and the place was closing. So I didn't have a chance to do any major power runs with any timing advance at all. So I'm giving it a little bit of timing on the street tune, but I really need to get back on the dyno and eke out some of that timing and figure out what we can push out of the setup. I think, you know, realistically probably not going to get like a whole ton of power out of this. I'd be happy with maybe, you know, 20 or 30 horsepower to the wheels, but you know, even if it's 5 or 10, the added performance in other areas like throttle response, amazing, right? Just the smoothness of everything, amazing. The sound, like, there's so much drama. The drama is great. Like, it's not annoying, it just sounds so mean, in a good way. So all of those things are reasons why you should think about an ITB. But if you just want like pure power, and you know, you're kind of always at wide open throttle or on and off, or you have very long roads where you want that power, like maybe if you live in the Midwest or whatnot, I don't know if this setup is going to be right for you, honestly. But in any case, let me see, what were some of the other questions? Oh, smog. Yeah, so obviously if you live in California and you're asking the smog question, I think you're kind of just joking, because everything here, you change any little bit and it's like illegal, right? But I'll be honest, you know, despite all the major changes here, my goal for this car, and I'm very passionate about this because I love the environment. I do a lot of mountain biking, and this place, you know, just is incredible, right? Like, it's just planet Earth. So I want to make sure that my tailpipe, oh, look at that, so much dirt. I want to make sure that my tailpipe emissions are going to be as clean as possible. So in terms of running catalytic converters and in terms of tuning for kind of tailpipe emissions, 100%, this car will have it. I actually learned, like, you know, in all the hours and hours and hours I spent learning the ECU and learning how to tune, I'm now really passionate about making sure that the tailpipe emissions coming out of this car are going to be clean. So I can't wait to do that. It's going to be like phase 2. Hopefully a little bit later this year, I'll be able to crank out that kind of a tune. Let's see here. So what's left to do? I obviously got to go to the dyno, so got to figure that out. The engine build is probably next on the list. So one of the main reasons why I wanted to do all the R&D on a stock motor is because when we do put in a new engine, I want to rule out any issues that come up. I want to rule out that it's an ITB issue because it's running perfectly on this. And oh, next to do is obviously the airbox. So one thing unique about one of our design criterias for this is that we wanted to have a flat plane, like a flat starting point with the airbox. So anyone who wants to make their own airbox it'd be an easier process for them. So there's a reason why these don't like point this way in terms of the flat plane starting point on the ITBs. So you can basically just put a plate here and it'll be flat and you can build your airbox. So that's next on the list. We're gonna be building that with the help of a good friend, and I just need to do altitude tuning. So I have a trip coming up hopefully to Streets of Willow, and at Streets of Willow is about 2,000 to 2,500 feet of altitude, and that'll give me some good data for getting the barometric sensor kind of squared away. So gosh, this video went really long, right? But if you have any questions, or if you guys want me to go in depth about any particular part of this build, like if you want me to start going into like the HKS maps and look at my strategy, for example, on like cold starting, or you want to see my strategy for high altitude, or my strategy for like vacuum load compensation, like when you're highway cruising, right? Or even like my tip-in strategies and my tip-in compensation acceleration tables, like those kinds of things are super interesting for me. So it took me some time to learn how to do those. So I'm happy to go through them, but just let me know what other areas of the tune you want me to get into, and happy to do it. All right, so if you guys have any questions, just post in the comments, let me know. Go to nsxprime.com, guys. That's it's an awesome website. Like, don't let it die. It's a cool place to be, and just let me know, and hope everyone stays safe. All right guys, talk to you later. Bye.